everyone, it is Mr. Shark Spambot here, and in today's video, I'm going to be talking about shells and hacking. The two different types of shells I'm going to be talking about today are bind shells and reverse shells. So this is how a bind shell would work. So in this case, the attacker machine connects to port 443 on the target machine to get shell access to the machine. On the target machine, port 443 is listening for incoming connections. This is started by a payload that spawns back a shell to anyone who connects. Now, you could send the payload in many different ways, and one of the ways would be to, well, you could send an email and this could have a Trojan in it. Or you could hack this person's network, right, or whatever network this machine is in, then run an ARP spoofing attack, then run a download interceptor, and serve a Trojan instead of the file that the person wants to download. Now, so in this case, the target machine is the server side and the attacker machine is the client side. So see, the way a web server works is that if the client wants a file, they want to download a file, then the web server will send back the file, and the web server will be the one listening for incoming connections. Okay? And if the client wants a web page, it'll send back a web page. And still the web server, the server side, is listening for the incoming connections. The attacker, or in this case, the client, but in this case the attacker, is sending the connections. And a flaw in this type of shell is that antivirus programs can very easily detect this, because many ordinary users will not ever do this. Right? Ordinary users, they just don't open up some port on their machine and listen for incoming connections how a web server would. This is just not common. It's just not what a normal user would do. Another flaw with this shell is that anyone can connect to the target machine, not just you. So any other attacker can also connect to the target machine, and this makes it not as secure for you because anyone else can connect to this target machine, and second of all, this makes a vulnerability on the target machine. Usually you would want to be the only one to use or to be able to access this machine and use the shell. So this shell, because of that, it's not as popular as the reverse shell, which is what I'm going to talk about right now. So in a reverse shell, this is like the complete opposite of a bind shell. The attacker machine in this case has port 443 listening for incoming shell connections. The attacker uses a script that waits for incoming connections. On the target machine, the target connects to port 443 on the attacker machine. This is started by a payload that spawns back a shell to the attacker. And you could use the exact same way of giving the shell to the victim. It doesn't really matter. What matters is that this is a different type of shell. And so in this case, the attacker machine is the server side, since the attacker is listening for incoming connections, and the target machine is the client who sends the connection back to the attacker machine. And so basically, this is going to be less easily detectable by antivirus programs because you're mimicking a client interaction, or how a normal user would send a request to a web server. And especially since this is an executable, this can mimic something like an installer, and which is just sending a request to a web server, which is just getting files. And so this can be very easy to mimic. And what you could even do is, as soon as you get the shell, you could actually download what the target wants and just run that and move your shell to a different location. And this will be a perfect way to bypass AVs. Another thing is, you're the one getting the shell connection back, not someone else. And this makes it more secure. So there are many different types of reverse shells. There are Netcat reverse shells, there are Metasploit reverse shells, there are Empire reverse shells. I've also created my own reverse shells, and I called it the Shadow Shark reverse shell. And so different shells, and just talking about shells as a general, can be used for different purposes. Like, usually PHP reverse shells are used to penetration test web servers. Okay? And so different type of shells, they may use their different methodologies. So just because one shell is a reverse shell or one shell is a bind shell doesn't mean it's going to be exactly the same. It could still use its own way to bypass AVs. For example, Metasploit, it uses its encoders to encode its source code. And Empire, they use stagers. And my own reverse shells, they encrypt all the traffic right before sending it, and they use simple encryption such as base64 or hex. And because of this, this will mimic something like a normal web server would do. Just use some basic encryptions, maybe use it as like a padding or whatever. And this is what like a normal web server would use, especially since my shells also use serialization like normal web servers. So this makes it a lot like how a normal web server would be. And so, like I said, different types of shells and different types of different types of shells have different types of methodologies to bypass AVs. And the more unique you can create your shell, and if you could create even your own type of methodology to bypass AVs, the more likely you'll be to be able to bypass antivirus programs. And so this is what you need to focus on. You need to think like how a normal web server would interact. Maybe you could even create your own type of shell. It won't even be a bind or reverse shell. You just create your whole different type of shell, and you could use this to bypass AVs. Or you could create your own type of bind shell, your own type of reverse shell, and they're your own unique code, but also have their own unique ways to bypass AVs. And because of this, they're less likely to be detected by antivirus programs. Now, Metasploit and Empire shells are very complex, and they have they have their own unique ways to bypass AVs. So I'm probably gonna make a whole separate video on just how they work and how they bypass antivirus programs, because it's not like a very simple topic. They're very complex shells, and these have been designed by professionals. Okay, so that'll be it for today's video, and thank you for watching this video. If you like this video, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and be ready because in the next video, I'm going to be talking about Shadow Shark reverse shells.